You've heard it, and I've heard it. The idea that players back then were slower, weaker, and smaller than modern-day athletes. Is it somewhat accurate? Probably. Is it also grossly exaggerated? Probably that too. In the past 10 years of modern NBA basketball, the average height of the NBA player is 6 foot 7 inches tall and weighs 220.7 pounds. In the 10 years of the 1980s, the average height was also 6 foot 7 inches tall and the average weight was 207 pounds. So although they stood just as tall side to side to one another, the major difference was the weight of the players at nearly 14 pounds less. Simply put, this difference was usually made up of muscle mass. Modern players have an advantage with modern training methods, eating habits, and fitness routines. Guys in the 80s were simply skinnier, but many of them were still very athletic and had lean muscle. They just overall looked a little less physically imposing than today's players. This has partially led some newer fans to criticize this era when they're looking at some of the most non-threatening and least athletic players of the 80s. They'll say things like the league was packed with part-time plumbers and accountants. I hate it when people say this though, because it's easy to take small samples and condemn an entire era for it. It's almost like when people think of the state of athleticism in 2020, they automatically think of Giannis. And when they think of the state of athleticism in the 90s, they think of Jeff Hornacek. The problem with that is that it's erring on an extreme example, and isn't a proper survey of the athleticism of the league as a whole at that time. Want another example? Picture 20 years from now. People are hating on LeBron James, saying he didn't play in a strong era of real athleticism, and here's their future arguments. How strong is LeBron's era in 2016 when he lost the MVP race to a guy who struggles to dunk a basketball? How strong could that era have been when one of the best players in the league was someone who was consistently overweight? In LeBron's era, he played against plumbers like JJ Redick and Kelly Olynyk. How weak were the athletes in LeBron's era if a guy who was only 5 foot 9 inches tall could average nearly 30 points per game? Don't you guys see how ridiculous and biased these statements are? Although many of the statements are true to an extent, they're cherry-picking details and acting as if it's the complete picture. They're completely lacking context, but statements like these are usually just emotionally motivated agendas in order to build a negative narrative about a player that they don't like as much as their favorite player. People do this all the time with the 1980s. But when you look around the league in that era as a whole, you see guys who were incredible athletes like Dominique Wilkins, Kenny Skywalker, Michael Jordan, Daryl Dawkins, Charles Barkley, Gerald Wilkins, Julius Erving, Shawn Kemp, Xavier McDaniel, Hakeem Olajuwon, Karl Malone, James Worthy, Tom Chambers, Darrell Griffith, David Thompson, Terrence Stansbury, Clyde Drexler, Larry Nance, Dennis Rodman, Orlando Woolridge, David Robinson, Roy Hinson. Seriously, do I need to keep going? Many people are just too young or weren't watching at that time to know about a lot of the freakishly gifted athletes of the 1980s, just like how 20 to 30 years from now, many people won't know about many of the great athletes we watch in today's game.